You're listening to the May 20th, 2016 edition of the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup, the weekly podcast that's focused on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. The Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Hey everybody, I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. On this podcast every week, we bring you the top 5 trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions based off of Surfwatch Labs cybercrime data. So we'll jump right into it with the top event from the past week.
Coming in at number 1 this week, we have the hacker dark forum known as null.io. It was breached, and a 1.3 gigabyte compressed file was made publicly available, which exposed the sensitive information of members, which included private messages, purchase histories, email addresses, and passwords protected by MD5. The website provided a place for malicious actors to exchange sensitive information, such as compromised credentials and stolen bitcoins. More than 500,000 user accounts were included in the dump. It's not known how the attack happened yet. There might be some information, in the coming weeks. We're not sure. But it may have been connected to vulnerabilities in its forum software, which we kind of see that quite a bit. That could be a possibility. But yeah, it's not quite known what's going on with that yet.
Yeah, one interesting thing I saw reading this article, I think it was on Ars Technica, they at the end of the article, they said it's not precisely clear how the hack happened, but the risk-based security researchers pointed out that the IP board forum software and the accompanying plugins were riddled with critical vulnerabilities. So the researchers were speculating that the hackers might have exploited these to get in and then leak the entire database. Now, this was interesting because I don't know if you remember this, Matt, but probably a month ago, Surfwatch Labs put out a blog post about Envision Power Systems, their forum software, and it was connected to a dark web actor who was talking about potentially doing these, spreading malware to all these big companies, professional sports companies,
like the
entertainment
NFL,
companies.
Yeah, all of that, yep.
I just thought it was interesting that these researchers in the Ars Technica article and then our researchers and what we've seen on the dark web were both pointing to this forum software for different potential attacks. Another trending event that's popped back up this week is Swift. We've talked a lot about the Swift messaging system and the different attacks on banks.
Yeah, the big one being Bangladesh bank heist, right? Those $81 million or something.
That they stole. Well, on Friday, Swift issued a warning of another commercial bank that was being targeted with these fraudulent Swift messages. And then on Sunday, the bank in question actually came forward. It's Vietnam's Tien Phong Bank, and they confirmed that it had fended off an attack. So it was similar to the Bangladesh central bank attack. However, in this case, there weren't any losses because the bank caught the suspicious request and they halted the transfer of funds. And in this case, they said that the transfers were made using the infrastructure of an outside vendor that was hired to connect to the SWIFT system. That's what Reuters reported. The malware identified in this attack targeted a PDF reader that is used by customers to review statements summarizing SWIFT transfers. And researchers at BAE Systems, they said that the malware samples that they examined related to this attack provided strong links for the same coder behind the recent bank heist cases, as well as a wider known campaign stretching back almost a decade. Swift, I'm looking at their press release now. They put out a press release on May 13th. They said that regarding this latest attack and the one against the Bangladesh bank, they said in both instances, the attackers have exploited vulnerabilities in the bank's fund transfer initiation environments prior to the messages being sent over Swift. They said, as a matter of urgency, we remind all customers again to urgently review controls in their payment environments to all their messaging, payments, and e-banking channels. And they said that the attacks typically, in these two cases, they followed this pattern where first the attackers compromised the bank's environment, Then the attackers were able to obtain valid credentials that have the authority to create, approve, and submit SWIFT messages from customers' back offices or from their local interfaces. And then the attackers submit fraudulent messages by impersonating the operators from whom they stole the credentials. And then finally, the attackers hide evidence by removing some of the traces of the fraudulent messages. So according to the SWIFT press release, at least they're kind of putting the onus more on the banks, it sounds like, rather than their own issues.
Yeah, Jeff, that sounds pretty common, right? I don't know how many times, let's look at the fappening or Celebgate, when everyone was blaming Apple iCloud for a compromise through their system, and they were saying oh, you leaked all these photos. Well, it was really that people just found the credentials of others and used it to hack into their accounts. And it kind of sounds like that's what happened here. Swift is getting all these headlines because that's the technology that's being used to conduct a lot of this, but it's really that somehow, cyber criminals are getting the credentials from other people, and that's what they're using, it appears, to conduct this fraudulent activity.
Yeah, and the Reuters article talking about the banks criticizing SWIFT, they said in there that some U.S. banks want to discuss with SWIFT whether it responded quickly enough to the breaches and if it should help banks better secure their systems. So, I don't really know at all. I'm not in the financial sector, and neither are you, Matt, so we don't really know how this SWIFT works and what the security is around it, but it seems like some of the banks are at least slightly pointing the finger at Swift.
Well,
Swift's pointing right back, which is to be expected.
And Swift, I did see some numbers on it. Swift, they have thousands of customers. They handle millions of transactions a day, the communications for it. So, if there was a vulnerability in that, that could be a lot of trouble. But what surprised me, with Swift, everything I've seen about it, people had described it as it's, the security on it is known to be, pretty good, and they kind of cover their tracks. And then all these things started happening, and Swift happened to be involved with it. But like I said, from everything it looks like we're reading, it doesn't look like Swift is actually possibly to blame, but we don't really know either. So we can just kind of go off what some of the other experts are saying and run down the event timeline. Coming in number 3, we're going to talk about LinkedIn. Now, back in 2012, so just if anyone remembers back in 2012, LinkedIn made headlines after hackers broke into its database and exposed the account and credentials of 6.5 million people, and this was on a Russian forum. Since that time, people were urged to change their passwords, and if there was a vulnerability, it got patched and all of that. Now, this week, a hacker going by the name of Peace offered a database of 117 million accounts from LinkedIn. Security researchers have confirmed that at least some of these credentials are legitimate, and they are from the 2012 data breach. Now, with this, there's a long way to go. That's a lot of records. It's not known if, if there's actually 117 million accounts that were compromised. However, it does kind of bring up some basic things here. If you were a LinkedIn member back in 2012 and you didn't reset your password, you should immediately do that, because attacks like these, like you hear about, that doesn't mean they go away. Just because you don't knowingly see that your information was used maliciously, that doesn't mean it wasn't, in one way or the other. It's just kind of interesting. I don't know. Like I said, we see this a lot, Jeff, where we'll see a database that it contains, a million accounts, and then come to find out, there's all these accounts listed, but how many of them were actually legitimate? Not saying that's the case here, but
I saw on Twitter Troy Hunt. He's the guy behind Have I Been Pawned. He put on Twitter that very high probability that these are legitimate. I don't know if they're all legitimate, like you said, Matt. But interesting, Brian Krebs, he was criticizing LinkedIn because back in the 2012 breach, there was this incident. Obviously, 6.5 million people were compromised, and they could have had all their whole user base reset their passwords. But LinkedIn just assumed it was only the 6.5 million. They only had the 6.5 million reset their passwords. And now, again, Krebs is criticizing them for the same thing this time. He said that inexplicably, LinkedIn's response to the most recent breach is to repeat the mistake it made with the original breach by once again forcing a password reset for only a subset of its users. So, I mean, if you can imagine if this information has been out there since 2012, if LinkedIn had just simply forced a reset across the board back in 2012, then everyone it wouldn't be
right.
Yeah.
Right.
So interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing when now obviously, Jeff and I will say this all day long. We're not experts when it comes to like what a company has to do with certain things like this. I don't know I'm sure it's not just pushing a button in it. Everyone has to, forcibly reset their password.
Well, I saw they said they didn't want to, disrupt the user base. But I'm thinking resetting your password. I mean, I know people don't like resetting their password, but better than being in the news for a whole nother round of data breaches.
Isn't that indicative of a bigger problem than cybersecurity, though?
Yeah, that's really...
Isn't that the problem?
Moving on, we have an update on this Op Icarus campaign. We talked about it a bit last week. All these different banks were trending. Once again, I was in our data this morning trying to get the top trending targets for you, Matt. And the top 50 targets, they were all, I mean, most of them were all different banks and stuff like that. So a lot of people are talking about these bank attacks. Some of them are actually getting attacked. And an update, the big one is Bank of England. There was other ones that were attacked as well, but Bank of England, the internal email server of the Bank of England was taken offline by Anonymous as part of this Op Icarus campaign. Other targets that were hit include the websites of the National Reserve Bank of Tonga, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and the central banks of Sweden, Myanmar, and Laos. The motivation behind these attacks comes from a wonderful message posted in January from Anonymous. They said that, quote, "We must strike at the heart of their empire by once again throwing a wrench into the machine. But this time we face a much bigger target, the global financial system. This time our target is the New York Stock Exchange and Bank of England."
Okay, here, let's rewind here. Jeff, when we were getting ready for the podcast, he said this quote, but I didn't really know what he saw. I thought you were talking like some Star Wars thing. So that's what you were quoting.
Yeah, that's what I was laughing about before we started. Yeah, I was chuckling about this to Matt before we started recording because, come on, you're going to strike at the heart of the empire by taking a website offline for 30 minutes? I mean...
You probably did everyone a favor because then they didn't have to worry about getting their damn emails for whatever time the email server was down.
I mean, everyone knows what I think about hacktivists, so we don't have to have that whole conversation again, but it's just funny.
Kudos to you, Anonymous.
It's just funny the way they inflate themselves.
Yeah, no kidding. They're all talk. And coming at number 5, we have Okcupid. For those that don't know what Okcupid is, it's kind of like it's a social site. You can put in, you can meet friends, potential love interests. I actually have a friend that is married to someone that they met through Okcupid. Anyway, a database holding 70,000 Okcupid users' data has been published on the internet. The database information was posted by researchers at two separate universities in Denmark. User information such as usernames and sexual preference were included in the posting. A student at Indiana University claimed he could take the data one step further and find the actual names of at least 10,000 Okcupid users based on this data. Much of this information is viewable for free on Okcupid for the account holders, which is kind of the appeal of it, because if you go to like some of the other dating sites, you got to pay a premium.
Yeah, you got to initiate, you got to do 5 different things before you can get someone's information.
Yeah, on Okcupid, you just sign up and you can view everyone's information. It's free and readily available. However, the dating site says that this posting violated the company's terms of service. So what happened here? So we got 2 guys, they went through Okcupid and they posted all this information, possibly thinking that they weren't necessarily doing something illegal, because you can just go on Okcupid and you can find these people. There's nothing really barring you from doing that. But again, using this data, like some students said that they could have used the data and actually found the real contact information of some of these members. I don't really know what the purpose behind doing that is. Do
you know if this was researchers doing this, or was this malicious actors?
It was two students from Denmark, from 2 universities in Denmark. They took it.
Oh, shows how well I listen.
Yeah, Jeff has hearing problems. But yeah, I don't really know what the point of doing that was.
Those are the top events. As always, there was many, many more cybercrime events, but we would be on this podcast for 10 hours talking each week if we covered everything. Moving on to the top advisories. We've talked about this Crypt XXX ransomware a few times on the podcast, and it's kind of this back and forth mouse game between the researchers and the malware creators. So this new ransomware variant known as Crypt XXX was first spotted in mid-April, and it's a typical ransomware. It encrypts the user's files, but it still allows them to access their computer in order to buy Bitcoin and pay a ransom demand. The ransomware worked until security firms made a decryption tool in order to beat it, so you could get your stuff decrypted for free. Then Crypt XXX 2.0 came out, and users were no longer able to access their computer for any reason until the ransom was paid. And then once again, obviously they couldn't decrypt it. This tool was no longer working. But now there is a new decryption tool that was released by Kaspersky Lab, and they're able to decrypt the encrypted files again. So it's kind of this whole back and forth going. And I think the main way that this is being spread is through malvertising and the Angler exploit kit.
Yeah,
from what researchers
there's been
said.
several attacks where this, through a lot of the main malvertising attacks, which we have covered over the past couple weeks. Actually, I'm very surprised. I don't think there is a malvertising advisory this week, but that is the main ransomware that has been seen so far, at least lately, being distributed is that Crypt XXX. And another thing with this, guys, this is one of the alerts we posted. Crypt XXX has only been around since the middle of April, so we got about a month. It's already evolved. Luckily, decryption tools have been, created to combat it, but part of the problem is not everyone's going to know that. So if they get affected with this, they're not going to know what to do. And even though Kaspersky Lab came out with another tool, it's probably just going to be a matter of time until they upgrade it again, and it's just this cat and mouse thing, like, here, I'm going to put my best foot forward. No, here's what I'm putting out. So we're going to be probably hearing about this in the future. Ransomware has just been ridiculous this year. That's all we're talking about this year is ransomware, it seems.
Yeah, it seems
and
like...
banks. And banks. We've been talking about banks.
Yeah.
They haven't... Has there been any ransomware attacks on banks? Have we mentioned that this year yet?
I would think that there must have been, but I don't remember talking about it on this podcast really all that much.
I don't think so.
It's mainly been the DDoS attacks and the Swift attacks.
Yeah.
Business email compromise are kind of related because it's, business and the
right.
bank.
Our next alert comes from US CERT, and they issued an alert on SAP. So this alert is labeled TA16-132A, and it talks about an SAP vulnerability that is affecting at least 36 known organizations throughout the world. According to researchers, these organizations' SAP business application has displayed indicators of exploitation. And here's a quote from the US CERT alert. The observed indicators relate to the abuse of the Invoker Servlet, a built-in functionality in SAP NetWeaver application server Java systems, or SAP Java platforms. The Invoker Servlet contains a vulnerability that was patched by SAP in 2010, and we're talking about in 2016. However, the vulnerability continues to affect outdated and misconfigured SAP systems.
So this is our weekly update your systems.
Update your systems.
Yeah, there's always some advisory related to some 5-year-old vulnerability that's hitting people.
This is a pretty big one. SAP software, it's used in like customer relationship management tools, and a lot of things that businesses use. And here's the problem with this. This vulnerability, if it's not patched and you get hacked, it allows for complete control, account takeover. And at this point, a hacker can really do whatever they want. I mean, they have control of your system. They could shut you down. They could steal all your data. They could probably, who knows? And again, like Jeff said, this is just another situation. Update your software. If you keep it up to date, all this stuff gets patched. This patch was released in 2010, and it's still affecting organizations worldwide.
Yeah, so moving on, we got a couple Android-related advisories. The first one is this Android SMS Spy 88 banking Trojan. Over 40,000 Android devices throughout the world are infected with this banking Trojan, according to researchers. This banking Trojan has been around since 2014, and it remains very popular. Cyber criminals have evolved it, making it capable of ransomware attacks. always coming back. You got to stay up with
And
2016.
there's that banking and ransomware connection.
You were just asking. Plus, we got Android. We
That's
got
right.
Android, banking, and ransomware all coming together here.
The Holy Trinity.
Yeah, the Holy Trinity. So this is Dr. Webb researchers. This is what they said about it. The Trojan is distributed under the guise of a benign application, for example, Adobe Flash Player. Once launched, the Trojan prompts the user to grant it administrator privileges. It then turns on the Wi-Fi module and checks every second whether a Wi-Fi or cellular connection has been established. And if there's no connection that's been made, it enables these communication channels once again, and I believe it keeps trying to connect to these Wi-Fi or cellular connections in order to kind of do its dastardly deeds.
Such as ransomware attacks or whatever else, probably intercepted try to intercept data, things like that, more than likely.
And then the other Android advisory that came out is there's another large click fraud botnet that has been spotted on a number of devices throughout the world. And then it's hijacking user search results in order to make profits through Google's AdSense program. So the malware behind this botnet is called redirector.paco. According to researchers, this malware has been around since 2014, and it has affected almost 1 million devices, around 900,000. The majority of these victims are in India, but many other countries, including the United States, have been affected as well. And I thought this advisory was interesting because just last week we were talking about the Viking Horde botnet, and that was Checkpoint researchers that discovered that, and everyone was talking about these Android botnets, and there was a few different articles about, are we going to start seeing more of this on Android? And I think we actually said, hey, maybe we'll start seeing more of this, and now here we go. We got another malware and another pretty large botnet, almost 1 million different devices.
Coming in at number 5, we're going to talk about PayPal. Security researchers spotted this scam, and it's attempting to obtain as much personally identifiable information as possible, which is pretty common sense, I'd imagine. Cybercriminals initially send an email out to PayPal users, which says their account has been placed on a limited status. The only way to reactivate the account, according to the email, is to confirm certain information. The information asked for in this email includes names, addresses, mother's maiden name, payment card information, social security numbers, and phone numbers. So obviously if you fall for that, you might as well just tell them everything about yourself and say, there you go.
Give us every important piece of information about you.
But people are falling for it, which is why it's trending and why we're talking about it.
And I know we talk about PayPal quite a bit with these advisories, and I was just looking at I was going through a lot of our Surfwatch Labs dark web data, because we generally don't talk about what's going on the dark web as much on this podcast, but we also collect a bunch of stuff on the dark web, and PayPal accounts are one of the most popular accounts that are sold on the dark web, obviously because it's connected to money, and you could get a couple different credit cards or bank accounts just from one. eBay accounts too. I think eBay and PayPal were both right up there. I believe it was actually employer email accounts were number one, and then, there's a whole bunch of other accounts besides it. I can't remember. Anyways, let's just move on from this mess of my rambling to the trending legal news items. One of the big ones I've spent half the morning trying to wrap my small little brain around is the Supreme Court ruling. There was this Spokio versus Robbins lawsuit that's been going on, I believe, all the way back to 2010. And on Monday, the Supreme Court issued a ruling about it. I don't know if you've ever heard of this Spokio website.
I have not, actually.
Apparently, it's a people search engine, so you can go and you can enter someone's name, and it returns information from all these different databases.
Oh, okay.
About this person. I think they have paid services, so if you're an employer and you're hiring someone, you can pay to basically have them pull out information for you. Well, apparently, in 2010, this Thomas Robbins guy, somehow he got wind of his information on there. And it said he was in his 50s, he was married, he had children, he had a graduate degree. Only problem, every single one of those things wasn't true.
Okay.
So he decided to start this class action lawsuit against Spokio, claiming that the information they provided about him was inaccurate, and that could lead to, if an employer is going to hire him, maybe they won't hire him because they say, hey, he's got a graduate degree, he's overqualified for this. Well, anyways, the district court dismissed Robbins' complaint, saying that it didn't have any standing because he couldn't show any actual injury. And then the Ninth Circuit Court reversed that decision and said that, hey, this Robbins guy has adequately alleged injury in fact, so there can be a lawsuit. And then the Supreme Court, they basically vacated the Circuit Court's decision and said they didn't necessarily say that there wasn't injury and that the lawsuit was null, but they sent it back to the Circuit Court, basically saying they had some more work to do because their reasoning behind it was faulty. Does that make sense?
Yes, actually.
It's so hard describing these because these legal things, they go on for years.
I imagine it's a lot of information to go to kind of peel through and try to discern what the heck's going on.
Yeah, especially to explain over a podcast. But hopefully that makes sense to you guys. So that's kind of where we're at now. They basically said that this analysis was incomplete because we've talked about this in the past in the podcast with Standard. In order to have a lawsuit, you can't just have a lawsuit against anybody. It has to be both concrete and particularized harm. So they're saying that the Ninth Circuit said that the harm was particularized, meaning it actually was this individual. You can't just say, my neighbor was harmed, give me money. But they're saying that there was no concrete evidence of harm and that the Ninth Circuit failed to take this into account. So that they got to go back to the Ninth Circuit and figure it out. But anyways, all that aside, the reason that this is important is it's kind of interesting because both sides are claiming a victory here. And obviously, if it's a Supreme Court ruling, there's a lot of potential that could come out with this. So those on the plaintiff side are saying that this is good because the Supreme Court noted that in their ruling that concrete injuries don't always have to be tangible. But that goes back to previous rulings basically saying that, you know, if you have your payment card information stolen, it's not that you necessarily have to have tangible evidence. I mean, that could be evidence for future harm. So they're kind of saying that they won, and then the other side, which actually did win, is saying that this is a boost for this problem of these no-injury class actions that we keep seeing where there's these huge class action lawsuits. No one's really showing any injury. They're just saying that, hey, they violated some kind of statute, such as the Fair Credit and Reporting Act. But the court is basically saying, well, just because you violate a statute doesn't mean you can file a lawsuit over it. You have to actually prove harm as well. So that's kind of the whole what's been going on the last 6 years and what the court said in 2 minutes.
6 years of work. Jeff just broke it down in 2 minutes. You should switch careers. You should be. Like
I should. You know, with all these complaints and stuff I'm reading, I'm still fairly ignorant on the law. Let's not inflate me too much here, but. At least I can understand it to myself. I don't know if I can explain it to you guys quite as well, but hopefully that worked.
Well, it sounds like, you know, if I were to, number one, you know, depending on what this guy was trying to get into, if I found some site that said I had some, you know, graduate degree or like, you know, if it made me sound better than I was, initially I think to myself, well, cool, you know, but if you really think about it, I'm sure there are a lot of employers that use a service like that because they want to know, especially, you know, like the higher the job or the more responsibility, they want to know who they're getting. I actually agree with this. If there's going to be a program out there that is saying like, oh, here's all this information on this person, that information's wrong, and an employer or some decision-making party is making a decision based on information, well, yeah, I'd be kind of perturbed about that too.
Well, the really interesting thing about this, which I suppose I can mention briefly, is that the case, in my mind, at least from what I read, it's really about the power of Congress versus the power of the judicial system, because that they're saying that these people perhaps did violate one of these laws, such as the Fair Credit Reporting Act. They're not accurately reporting information. So Congress is saying if that happens, then you have the right to do something in the judicial system, but the court's basically saying, hey, Congress can't just say that you can sue someone. They still, you know, there's a constitution here.
Right.
So, yeah, to really just quick wrap this up with what this all means, there's a really great blog by Alison Frankel from Reuters. If you want to know more about this, just Google Alison Frankel and Reuters. She spoke with the attorneys on both sides, and both of them are kind of spinning it like they want it. Even the losers are spinning it like they want it. And the one thing they all agreed on is that expect that there's going to be more litigation around this because there's things within here that both sides are hopeful about that they can use. So they both said in the years to come, expect that there's going to be more litigation around this, whether it's in terms of data breach litigation or privacy stuff or whatever.
We have some Home Depot news. There's a lawsuit from financial institutions against Home Depot, and despite what Home Depot wanted, this lawsuit will proceed. On Tuesday, U.S. District Judge Thomas W. Thrash Jr. denied Home Depot's request to dismiss a lawsuit from financial institutions over the company's 2014 data breach. The lawsuit includes more than 100 plaintiffs and cites more than $150 million in damages to credit unions and community banks as a result of the breach. More than 56 million payment cards were compromised in the Home Depot breach. In March, the retailer announced a $19.5 million settlement with consumers impacted by the breach, in addition to attorney's fees and expenses of nearly $8.8 million. The consumer settlement also included agreements by Home Depot to improve data security over a 2-year period and hire a chief information security officer. So, looks like litigation will continue on that one as well.
Yeah, the consumer side just got settled earlier this year, and now the financial institutions, their lawsuits looking to go forward.
Yep.
So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. Another interesting legal story. I don't know if you guys have been following this at all, but there's this whole thing going on with the FBI and the child porn ring. I don't know if you remember that, Matt. Like
a little
the FBI,
bit.
Some people were kind of questioning the FBI's ethics because essentially they were running this child porn ring that they took over for a couple weeks to capture.
Right.
I mean, it seems like a good thing, but on the other hand, if your child's on the website and the FBI's running it,
right,
you'd be kind of pissed, right?
A little bit.
So there was a whole controversy about that. But back to the cybersecurity side, a judge ruled that the FBI does not have to disclose the vulnerability that they used in order to compromise this, because apparently there's a vulnerability in the Firefox web browser, and Mozilla, who runs this browser, they want the FBI, obviously, to tell them, hey, what's this vulnerability? We have millions of users. There's this active vulnerability we don't know about. You need to tell us so we can patch it. The FBI says it's a national security thing. They don't want to tell them. And this week, U.S. District Judge Robert Bryan, he ruled that the U.S. government does not have to disclose that vulnerability. So,
really?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Initially, the judge said they had to disclose the vulnerability to this plaintiff who's being charged. And then Mozilla said, hey, before you tell the plaintiff, tell us. And then I don't know what happened, but eventually the judge backpedaled on that and ruled that, yeah, they don't have to. So
I talked to one of our threat analysts this week, and we're kind of breaking down cyber threat intelligence and its uses and what it does well and things like that. One of the things that was brought up was cooperation, and it's one of the weakest things that we see in cybersecurity. And when I read this, unless I'm missing something, that is the word that comes up immediately, cooperation. So the FBI, when I'm reading this, the FBI would rather have this vulnerability out there that could be exploited eventually. For what reason? So they can continue to exploit it?
Yeah, from their point of view, obviously, if they can go on Tor on these anonymous websites and use it to find criminals, it's like you're taking away one of their potential.
I guess I get that, but at the same time, what if someone exploits that vulnerability? I don't know.
Well, basically, the court said that your issues with the U.S. government, so take it up with them, is what the judge said. And so Mozilla said that it's going to argue to the government, hey, the safest thing to do for user security is to disclose this vulnerability and allow it to be fixed, because it likely, and they've said that it's an active unknown vulnerability and it's putting millions of users at risk. Because, if the FBI knows about it, who's to say?
Right.
The Chinese government doesn't know about it, or some other cybercrime group doesn't know about it.
Coming in at number 4 this week, we're going to talk about HECO, which is an aircraft maintenance company, and they're facing a class action lawsuit over a data breach which compromised employee W-2 information, which is one of the biggest trends so far in 2016. So this class action lawsuit was filed on Tuesday. HECO is one of the many companies that fall for this popular phishing scam, in which cybercriminals request tax-related information. So every employee who worked and received wages from HECO in 2015 had their information compromised, which was approximately 3,000 people. Following the incident, several employees had fraudulent tax returns filed. According to the complaint, quote, HECO's failures handed to criminals the personally identifiable information of plaintiffs and other class members and put plaintiffs and the class at serious, immediate, and ongoing risk for identity theft and fraud. End quote.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of those W-2 related lawsuits. I'm sure we will see more. Just keep on coming with all the incidents we've had this year.
Definitely.
Our last legal item is a Ukrainian hacker has pled guilty to hacking all these different news wires. We talked about that before as well. There was a lot of different arrests going back to back when hackers compromised MarketWired, PR Newswire, and Business Wire. And then they would take those stolen press releases before they went public, and they would do all these trades because they would know, for example, a company's fourth quarter profits before they got announced to investors, and they could do different trades in order to capitalize on that non-public information. So there's been a ton of different arrests related to this. But this guy, this Ukrainian hacker, he is a 28-year-old from Ukraine. He is the first person to be convicted based on the hack of all these different news wires. And he pleaded guilty on Monday to his role in this international scheme that stole this information and made $30 million in illegal profits from these trades. So his role here, according to the press release from the Department of Justice, he admitted to hacking into PR news wires using stolen credentials from, I think he got them from a social media site, as well as selling stolen press releases from MarketWired. And then he also paid to get access into Business Wire's network and then used them, to steal all this non-public information. I've always thought this was one of the more, not to give praise to criminals, but I always thought this was one of the more clever attacks because, they didn't just steal money. They made, tons and tons of money.
Yeah, what'd you say, 30 million?
I think that was just him because I'm pretty sure that there was over 100 million total with all the different defendants. But I think his part contributed to 30 million. But anyways, we'll wrap that up on that good note. Bad guy got caught. Now we'll move on to the funny story of the week to wrap up the podcast.
Yeah, for the funny story of the week, we're going to do two things. Number one, we're going to go back to the LinkedIn breach. And number two, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics when it comes to the funny story, bad passwords. So we're going to bring a bad passwords list that is based off of the 117 million, we think. We're going back and forth. It's not super clear. Now, every time I talk about one of these lists, which I like to do because they make me laugh, I always ask Jeff if he can guess the number one ranked bad password that was used out of these passwords that were breached.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That's very good. Yeah.
And or maybe 7, 8, depending on the amount of characters LinkedIn requires.
It's funny you bring that up. We'll get to that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 was by far the most used bad password. As a matter of fact, it was found used 753,305 times out of all of those credentials that were found. That's a lot. If you move down the list, number 2 was actually the word LinkedIn. That was used almost 200,000 times.
Super secure.
Super secure. Password, which we talk about quite a bit, that was used almost 150,000 times. And then, as Jeff said, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They were both used respectively 94,000 times and 63,000 times. Moving down, you have word like sunshine, and then some clever genius really thinking to...
This is outside the box here.
Outside of the box thinking. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they put 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But that was only used 33,000 something.
And all the hackers were foiled.
I'm at a loss for words. You add all that together, this list had a ton of bad passwords on it, and they were all of them were used tens of thousands of times.
Yeah, what's interesting here isn't the bad passwords necessarily, because there's always going to be bad passwords, but just the frequency.
Yes.
Even if we're talking about the whole batch of 117 million, 753,000 of those total were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a significant percentage. I know it's less than 1%, but still.
Check your passwords, people. Come on.
And that'll do it for this week's Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup. As always, the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs helps organizations and service providers quickly establish a strategic cyber threat intelligence operation that drives more effective use of their tactical defenses. For interviews with cyber experts, check out Surfwatch Labs' other podcast, The Cyber Chat. And for more information on cyber threat intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.